Breaking tonight, the White House doubling down on its controversial argument that the Taliban is not a terror group. It started yesterday when the deputy White House spokesperson tried to argue that a group that has killed thousands and that the U.S. designated as a terrorist group back in 2002 is actually just an armed insurgency. We thought maybe that was just the deputy guy who was filling in for Josh Earnest. Well, Josh Earnest was back today, and he was asked what seemed like a very simple question.
Does the administration consider the Taliban a terrorist organization or not?
John, the reason that the Taliban is listed on this description that you have put forward here is for two reasons. One is they do carry out tactics that are akin to terrorism. They do pursue terror attacks in an effort to try to advance their agenda. That it's important to draw a distinction between the Taliban and al-Qaeda. The Taliban has resorted to terror tactics, but those terror tactics have principally been focused on Afghanistan. Now, al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization that has aspirations that extend beyond just the border between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that explains the difference in classification. But there is no doubt that both of these organizations are dangerous and have drawn our attention. After all, there are a large number of Taliban fighters that have been taken off the battlefield thanks to U.S. efforts and thanks to the courage and bravery of our servicemen and women.
Wow, it wasn't an hour-plus answer. He got hammered by the press corps for that amount of time, but you could see him on the ropes and not being straightforward from the sound of it. Why? Why then are they so determined not to answer this question with the obvious yes? Brooke Goldstein is director of the Lawfare project, and Andrew McCarthy is a former federal prosecutor and National Review contributing editor. Why? Why won't they just say yes?
People ought to be really angry. I mean, that was absurd factually. It's absurd legally. They don't want to answer the question because they are trying to redefine American law of terrorism. The only thing you need under American law to be a terrorist organization is to be foreign, to conduct terrorist activity, which is what he said they do, and to be a national security threat to the United States. That's it. And factually, they are a part, ideologically, they align themselves with the global jihad. That's why when they ran Afghanistan, they allowed al-Qaeda to use it as a launch pad for attacks outside Afghanistan.
So why don't they just say that? Why doesn't he just say, of course they are, yes?
Well, because the war, he's decimated al-Qaeda already, right? He told us that. He's put them on the path to defeat. The war is winding down, and terrorism is going away, so we have to find another word for it.
Brooke, they tried to make a distinction today between, they were asked, well, you know, the Taliban just murdered 140 school children, so they kind of seem like a terrorist organization. And he said, well, that was the Pakistani Taliban. As if the Afghanistan Taliban is some, you know, ball of joy that we don't have to worry about.
Right, and you know, this latest charade is very symptomatic of a larger problem within the administration, which is its inability to call evil what it is. Its inability to call Islamist terrorists, and we see this throughout. ISIS is not Islamic. Fort Hood was not an act of terrorism. It was an act of workplace violence. And now we have the Taliban. They're not terrorists. They're insurgents, which, you know, denotes a mere rebellion against an authority. You can't be an insurgent group and be a terrorist group at the same time. It's not mutually exclusive. So the question is why? Why won't this administration say the Afghani Taliban is a terrorist group? And the answer is because we would be admitting that we are leaving Afghanistan in the hands of a terrorist group. And the conflict is not over.
I know you believe that too. There's a reason they try to say, oh, like Hamas and Hezbollah and the Taliban, they're sort of focused on their own countries. That's very different from al-Qaeda and ISIS, which are on a global jihad. Why is that not valid?
Because, well, what they're doing is discounting the ideology that fuels the entire global jihad. And by minimizing, yes, and by minimizing each place. So Hamas is just concerned about what's going on in the Palestinian territories, and Boko Haram is in Nigeria. And the Pakistani Taliban has to be distinguished from the Afghan Taliban because they're...
Who can keep track of it all?
Well, they're counting on you not being able to keep track on it all. But when Bush actually said exactly the right thing after 9/11, it was clarifying. He said, our message to all regimes across the world is you are with us or you're with the terrorists. It wasn't a bunch of atomized, little networked independently acting organizations that didn't have a shared ideology.
Go ahead.
But we're fooling ourselves when we say that Hamas and the Taliban are not international per se. Hamas is a proxy of Iran.
Right,
it gets its funding from Iran. If you look even at the Afghani Taliban, they're engaged in a human trafficking network that does span international borders.
But we're now at a point, Brooke, where
and they take that money and they use it to fund terrorism.
The administration, I mean, they don't want to use that term terrorist. This is, of course, a day after we saw Al Jazeera English, the television channel, say we're going to ban the use of the term terrorist because one man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter, which is okay. That's one thing for Al Jazeera English, although query whether they really understand English because that is a word that we use. At the same time, the administration is denying that this group is a terrorist organization, notwithstanding the fact that the National Counterterrorism Center lists Taliban in Afghanistan as a terrorist group. The State Department has a $10 million reward for the Taliban leader, Mullah Omar, as a terrorist. And as I mentioned before, they were added to the list of specially designated global terrorists by executive order in July 2002.
In October, the Obama Justice Department indicted a guy from the Afghan Taliban for material support to terrorism, for supporting the activities of the Taliban and its partners, the Haqqani network.
I got to go. I got to ask you a quick question before I go.
Yeah.
You said the real danger in releasing those 5 guys, and that now they're back to it, or at least some of them are, is what?
Recruitment. When people commit terrorist acts against the United States or imprisoned by the United States, they become stars in the jihad. As far as recruitment, as far as fundraising, that's what they do. Their effect is exponential compared to what it was before.
When they get out of Qatar, they're going to go get a hero's welcome. Good to see you both. Well, the fight between the American president